On the bus, Fernanda leaned against the window, watching the world blur past her. When Pedro's text arrived, her heart ached, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. She turned her phone face down, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, as the bus carried her further from the man she loved and the life she thought they could build together. Pedro spent the entire day trying to reach Fernanda, but each call went unanswered, each message unreplied. By nightfall, his frustration and heartbreak had reached their peak, and he decided to go to her house. When he arrived, Fernanda's mother greeted him at the door with a somber expression. "Good evening," she said, her voice tentative. "Fernanda isn't here." Pedro, his heart pounding, stepped inside. "Where is she? Please, I need to talk to her." "She's gone on a trip to rest," her mother replied, unable to meet his gaze. "She didn't say when she would return." Pedro stared at her, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why can't you look me in the eye when you say that? What aren't you telling me?" Her mother hesitated, then motioned for him to sit. She took a seat across from him, her hands twisting in her lap. "Pedro, listen to me. Fernanda loves you, but she's hurting deeply after everything that happened. She made the difficult decision to step away from this relationship for her own peace. She asked me to give you this." She reached into her pocket and handed him the engagement ring, the very symbol of their love. Pedro took it, his hands trembling as he stared at it, unable to believe what was happening. "She couldn't have done this to us," he said, his voice cracking. "Our love isn't something you can just walk away from. I would leave everything for her. Please, tell me where she is." "I'm sorry, Pedro," her mother said, her voice filled with sorrow. "But I can't. Fernanda needs time and space to heal. I can see how much you're suffering, but my daughter is suffering too." Pedro left the house feeling hollow, as though a piece of himself had been stripped away. Days turned into weeks, and each day Pedro returned to Fernanda's house, hoping for some sign of her return. He sent her messages, called her repeatedly, but her silence was deafening. He barely ate, barely slept, consumed entirely by the void she had left in his life. One morning, Pedro decided he couldn't take it any longer. He drove to Fernanda's house with a newfound resolve. When her mother opened the door, she sighed at the sight of him, hollow-eyed, thinner than she remembered, and desperate. "Pedro, come in," she said softly. Pedro sat down, leaning forward with an urgency that was impossible to ignore. "I'm here to beg you, from the deepest part of my soul, tell me where Fernanda is. I can't eat, I can't sleep. My thoughts are consumed by her. I can't work. I need to see her. Please, let me tell her how much I love her." Her mother watched him carefully, her heart breaking at the sight of his despair. The weight of his suffering was evident in his every word, his every breath. She had tried to respect Fernanda's wishes, but now she saw that withholding the truth was causing just as much pain. "Pedro," she said at last, her voice trembling, "I'll tell you where she is. I know she'll be upset with me, but I can't let you both suffer like this." Pedro exhaled sharply, relief washing over him for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "You have no idea what I've been through. I've never loved anyone the way I love your daughter. She's the first woman I've ever opened my heart to, the first person I've allowed myself to truly care for. I'm going to see her right now." "Please, how long will it take to get there?" "It's a 6-hour drive," her mother replied. "But please, don't rush. Drive carefully, Pedro. Good luck. I know you love her." Pedro stood, his resolve unshakable. "Thank you. I'll bring her back. I promise." With that, he left, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and determination as he prepared for the long journey to reunite with the woman who had captured his heart. "Thank you so much," Pedro said, his voice filled with gratitude as he left Fernanda's mother's house. On the drive, he rehearsed countless words, crafting and recrafting how he would convince Fernanda to come back to him. Every curve of the road carried his hopes, his love, and his unwavering determination. When he finally arrived, his heart nearly stopped at the sight before him. Fernanda sat under the shade of an orange tree, lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She looked serene yet distant, like a painting brought to life. Pedro paused at the fence, hesitant, until the dog barked, breaking the stillness. Fernanda turned her head toward the sound, her eyes locking on Pedro. For a moment, she froze, as if her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Was this real? Was it truly him? But when Pedro, with that familiar and tender smile, said, "I came to get you, love of my life," she knew it was no mirage. Still frozen in disbelief, she watched as Pedro took a step closer. "Aren't you going to open the gate so I can come in?" he asked gently, his voice laced with warmth. Fernanda finally stood, her legs shaky but determined, and walked toward the gate. "Pedro, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I already told you," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I came to get the woman of my life, my other half." Before Fernanda could respond, her aunt drove up from the market. Pedro straightened as the woman stepped out of her car. She eyed him curiously before addressing Fernanda. "Who is this young man, Fernanda?" Pedro, taking a step forward, answered for her. "Good afternoon, My name is Pedro. I am Fernanda's fiancé, and I've come to take her back home." The aunt's expression softened, and a knowing smile crept across her face. "Ah, so you're the man behind her sadness." She walked closer, her gaze flickering between them. "I'm glad my sister gave you the address. If it were up to me, I'd keep her here forever. But I've watched her these past days, and I can see how much she's hurting without you. If this is what will make her happy, then you should take her." Pedro and Fernanda exchanged a glance, their emotions thick in the air. The aunt, sensing they needed privacy, excused herself, leaving them alone under the orange tree. They sat together, side by side, on the bench where Fernanda had been moments earlier. The conversation flowed like a river, raw and unfiltered. Pedro apologized for not protecting her from his family's venom, while Fernanda admitted her fears about fitting into his world. Every word exchanged brought them closer, stitching together the fractures that had formed between them. After more than an hour of talking, Pedro reached for her hand. "Let's go home," he said softly. "Our life together is waiting." The drive back felt shorter than it was, as they spent the entire 6 hours making plans. Pedro, with his usual enthusiasm, detailed his vision for their wedding, set to happen in just 2 weeks. He didn't want to take any more chances. Fernanda laughed at his impatience but secretly felt her heart soar at the thought of marrying the man she loved. Little did she know, Pedro had another surprise waiting for her. While she had been away, he had taken it upon himself to make her dream of owning a wine-tasting boutique with paired food a reality. He had purchased a beautiful storefront in a prime location, hired a decorator renowned for designing upscale liquor stores and restaurants, and had everything ready except the name. He glanced at Fernanda as she dozed off beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. A soft smile played on his lips. In 2 weeks, she wouldn't just be his wife, she would have a business of her own, a place where her dreams could flourish. As the city lights began to appear on the horizon, Pedro whispered, as if to himself, "Welcome home, my love. This is just the beginning." Pedro drove away from Fernanda's house, his mind a swirl of emotions, but a deep sense of satisfaction settled over him. He was exhausted but content. Fernanda's parents had been overjoyed to see their daughter back home, and the news of her engagement filled them with pride and hope. The love they saw between Pedro and Fernanda brought them peace, and they couldn't wait for their daughter to begin her new chapter with the man who adored her. The next morning, Pedro texted Fernanda, "I'm coming to pick you up in 30 minutes. Be ready." True to his word, Pedro arrived precisely on time, his excitement barely contained. Fernanda climbed into the car, her curiosity piqued as they drove. She couldn't imagine where Pedro was taking her. "Where are we going?" she asked, unable to keep the anticipation from her voice. "Patience, my love," Pedro said, a teasing smile on his lips. "Curiosity suits you, but trust me, you'll see soon enough." The drive ended in front of an elegant building, its sleek exterior giving away nothing about what lay within. Pedro led Fernanda to the door, opening it with a dramatic flourish. As they stepped inside, Fernanda gasped. It was a wine-tasting restaurant and store, more magnificent than anything she could have dreamed of. The space was a symphony of elegance, with warm lighting accentuating the gleaming glass shelves stocked with the finest wines. A cozy yet luxurious tasting area invited guests to sit and savor curated pairings. The decor was stunning, modern, yet with rustic touches that gave it a sophisticated charm. Fernanda turned to Pedro, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What are we doing here?" she whispered. Pedro grinned, his excitement barely contained. "This," he said, spreading his arms wide, "is your wedding present." For a moment, Fernanda was too stunned to speak. Her eyes darted around the space, taking in every detail, every thoughtful touch. Finally, she managed, "Pedro, it's beautiful. But I told you I wanted to do this on my own. You didn't have to spend all this money." Pedro held up a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. "Love, I know you wanted to do this yourself, and I respect that. But sometimes, the people who love us see possibilities for us that we can't see for ourselves. This is a reflection of how much I believe in you, in your talent. All you need to say right now is thank you." Fernanda's protest melted away as she threw her arms around Pedro, her eyes misty with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "Thank you for believing in me, for making my dream come true in ways I couldn't even imagine. I love you." "And I love you," Pedro replied, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. "But we're not done yet. There's more to plan." "What do you mean?" Fernanda asked, laughing softly as she wiped her tears. "Now," Pedro said, taking her hand and leading her back to the car, "we're going to the venue where we'll get married. We need to finalize the colors, the flowers, the menu, and, of course, the wine. The team is already there waiting for us to make all the decisions today. We're getting married next Thursday, and there's no time to waste." Fernanda laughed, her heart bursting with love for the man who had brought so much joy and magic into her life. "Next Thursday it is," she said, squeezing his hand. "Let's make it perfect." Thursday arrived, the day Pedro had been eagerly awaiting. He and Fernanda had agreed not to see or speak to each other for the 3 days leading up to their wedding, heightening the anticipation and excitement for the most important day of their lives. Both were filled with nervous energy, knowing their lives were about to change forever. The guests arrived and were guided to their seats in the beautifully decorated venue. Pedro's father, Leonardo, arrived first and took his place in the front row. Shortly after, Selena arrived, choosing a seat opposite Leonardo. Their eyes met briefly, and for a fleeting moment, there was a spark, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared past. Pedro stood near the justice of the peace, poised but visibly emotional, as he awaited his bride. Marcia, unsurprisingly, was not invited. Over the past months, she had isolated herself, consumed by her relentless ambition and bitterness. She spent her days plotting ways to regain power, her life devoid of genuine connection or happiness. The sound of the wedding march filled the air, drawing everyone's attention to the entrance. Pedro's breath caught as Fernanda appeared, radiant on her father's arm. She was breathtaking, her presence ethereal as she moved down the aisle with the grace of someone floating on air. Pedro's eyes glistened with tears, overwhelmed by the moment. When Fernanda's father handed her over to Pedro, the room seemed to pause, filled with the weight of love and promise. When it was time for the vows, Pedro spoke first, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. "Today, I'm getting married to my first love, my first girlfriend, the woman who taught me what it means to truly care for someone. You are my partner, my confidant, my best friend. You are more than I deserve, Fernanda, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring the gift that is your love. I promise to protect you, to stand by you, and to always be within reach, no matter what life brings. It is my greatest privilege to call you my wife." Fernanda was already crying by the time Pedro finished. She took a moment to steady herself before beginning her vows, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "Pedro, you are the man I've dreamed of my entire life. You are kind, supportive, and endlessly loving. Today, I marry the man who is not only my partner but my sanctuary. You've shown me a love I never thought possible. I am endlessly grateful for you, and I promise to love and cherish you for the rest of my days. I love you." Their vows left no dry eyes in the room. As the ceremony concluded, the couple sealed their love with a tender kiss, and the guests erupted into applause. Leonardo was the first to embrace Pedro and Fernanda after the ceremony, his pride for his son evident. He then hugged Fernanda warmly, as though she were already part of the family. Selena, who had been watching from a distance, felt a pang of regret for the way she had treated Fernanda. When her turn came, she hugged Pedro tightly, whispering through tears, "Forgive me, my son. I've been wrong in so many ways." Pedro, ever compassionate, held his mother close and said softly, "You are forgiven, Mom. But remember, love is the answer to everything. I love you." Selena wept as she turned to Fernanda, embracing her with unexpected tenderness. "Fernanda, I am so sorry for my insensitivity. You have my word that from now on, I will treat you as the daughter I've always wanted." Fernanda, moved by the sincerity of Selena's words, embraced her mother-in-law. "Thank you. That means the world to me." The reception was a celebration of love and joy. Selena took a moment to approach Leonardo, apologizing for her past mistakes. The two shared a poignant conversation, marked by forgiveness and closure. Meanwhile, Pedro and Fernanda introduced Fernanda's parents to Leonardo and Selena, who found themselves chatting amicably as the couple revealed in their magical evening. The festivities reached their peak with the couple's first dance, followed by the cutting of the cake. As the night wore on, guests gradually departed, leaving Pedro and Fernanda to enjoy the final moments of their wedding day surrounded by close family and friends. Later that evening, Pedro whisked Fernanda away to a luxurious suite in a seaside hotel, a perfect end to their perfect day. The next morning, the newlyweds boarded a plane bound for the south of France, where Pedro's private mansion awaited them. The wine-tasting business, which was now ready for launch, would wait until their return. For now, the couple would focus on nothing but their love, beginning their life together in a dreamlike honeymoon far from the rest of the world. Thanks for watching.